Welcome back to Coffee Kurosawa, a podcast where a film obsessive and a film fan sit down to talk about the films that are important to us. I am Ben Filipkowski, your resident film obsessive.
And I am Farrah Sarpkaya, a person who loves film, but like in a super chill, I'm on vacation and want to relax and be entertained kind of way.
And today we are talking about the first Kurosawa film on our watch list, Seven Samurai. Released in 1954, Akira Kurosawa's iconic Seven Samurai is widely regarded as one of the best films of all time and stands as a highly influential mix of action and drama. Yes, this is a samurai movie with heart, and it has been a tremendous source of inspiration for numerous North American filmmakers, not to mention the entire genre of action movies. Starring Kurosawa regulars Toshiro Mifune, Takashi Shimura, Daisuke Kato, and Minoru Chiaki, Seven Samurai is about a farming village beset by bandits and the ragtag bunch of samurai recruited to defend it. This is a movie about putting a team together, getting them to cooperate, and maybe learning something about themselves along the way. And if that sounds familiar, that's because everything from The Magnificent Seven to A Bug's Life to like 20 Star Wars things, and most recently a somewhat forgettable Zack Snyder movie, have cribbed the basic plot and structure from it wholesale. And hey, that's a good thing. As always, if you don't want to be spoiled, press pause right now, go watch it, set aside the appropriate amount of time, and then come back and listen to this now. This movie does feature scenes of violence, some scenes that could be construed as domestic abuse, some crude language, and certainly some implied sexual violence. So viewer discretion is, of course, advised. Farah, what did you think of Seven Samurai?
I'll be honest here, Ben. I was not excited for this. Not that excited, anyway. 3.5 hours of subtitles, not usually my jam, especially while I'm on vacation. But, like, I kind of loved it. From the assembling the team to the heartbreaking finale, it was funny and intimate and exciting and everything I really want in a movie. It is so incredibly cool also to see the origins of so many of our tropes come to life in this film. And they seem organic, and it makes me want to dive down a rabbit hole of Japanese theater to better understand where Kurosawa got his inspiration ultimately. Um, you mentioned that this movie has heart, and gosh, that's so accurate. Because, like, despite this large cast of characters, each of our villagers and each of our samurai have their own quirks and personalities, and the emphasis on connection and community is honestly so wonderful. And I'm not sure I'll watch it when I need something on in the background for crafting, but I will absolutely watch it again one day when I can just watch it without having to take notes for our
Yeah.
podcast.
By comparison, I watched this, oh gosh, close to three times in preparation. Once on its own, and twice with film crit commentaries playing, because I'm a nerd that way. I love it. This movie rips. And, before we dig in, I think it's probably worthwhile to go over a quick summary of what happens, because, yeah, it's like 3.5 hours. It's a long movie. There's an intermission in
Yeah.
it. It's wonderful. You've definitely seen some version of this story before. The short version of this story. Bandits visit a farming town and decide not to pillage it just yet, instead, opting to wait for the impending harvest. Just maximize their ROI,
Yeah,
really.
I love that they have the harvest schedule in mind. That's so efficient of them.
Yeah, they're like, no, 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 hang on. If we do this later, we'll get more. Pretty smart thinking. They ride off, but coincidentally, a few villagers who just happen to be hiding nearby hear them, bring the dire news to the town. This is bad not only for the obvious reason that the bandits are violent and are probably going to kill a bunch of people along the way, but also because even if they don't kill everyone along the way, with no food, the town is doomed. Turning to the town elder for guidance, the villagers are tasked with hiring samurai. But because they can only pay people with food and rice, they are told to look for hungry samurai. A few of the villagers head to the nearby town and hire a bunch of awesome, very hungry samurai. They hire Kanbei, Katsushiro, Gorobe, Heihachi, Kyuzo, Shichiroji, and of course, our chaotic hero, Kikuchio. What follows is a sequence of the villagers and the samurai getting to know each other, learning about each other, and growing to trust each other. Not to mention a youthful romance between our youngest samurai, that's Katsushiro, and a farmer girl named Shino. And there's also a more tragic foil to this romance between the tormented villager Rikichi and his agony over his wife's kidnapping by the bandits. This all comes before an extended, epic Act 3 battle wherein four samurai eventually give their lives in defense of the village, followed by a bittersweet ending where the surviving samurai realize that this was never their victory, really. The film closes on a joyous planting festival or a planting sequence showing the community the samurai have given hope to and what they gave their lives for before our heroes kind of move along with a bittersweet sort of sense to their next adventure.
That is a lot of movie, taking 3.5 hours and diving it into and like squishing it into 2 minutes. So today we've talked about focusing in on how the movie speaks to community,
Mm-hmm.
individuality, and class. And I think we're going to kick it off with community, the people. So, talk to me, Ben, about the symbolism that we see, how Kurosawa really brings this community to life.
For sure. I think that probably, if we're talking about like theme and the symbolism that kind of conveys that, the most obvious thing to me is just the arrangement of characters. How characters are blocked in a scene, which is physically the space that they inhabit in relation to one another and the set. But it's also just in how we get these kind of recurrent visual motifs of circles. The samurai kind of form circles when they are conversing with one another. The community form circles when they are conversing. The community of villagers form these circles when they are debating things internally as well. These groupings of circles really represent that kind of like cohesive whole, and it frames people not as individuals but as a collective more often than not. So that's something that kind of keeps popping up. We also see that in the kind of like the banner that is created for the samurai. It is six circles on a field and one triangle. One triangle represents, of course, Kikuchiyo, who is he is one of the samurai, but he's also kind of not. He's like the outsider who gradually works his way in. I think when that in that scene in particular, when they're like, "Well, what's the triangle?" Well, they're like, "Well, that's Kikuchiyo," and Kikuchiyo's kind of pissed off, but he's also kind of like, "Thank you."
Yeah, that tracks.
Like he's outwardly annoyed, but you can tell that there's just like a brief moment where he's got like a smirk of like of genuine happiness.
So it's interesting that circles and visually building out circles in this, because if we think about what predated, right, like film,
Mhm.
you would have a theater
Mhm.
where you have the literal three walls around the stage and then the fourth wall, which is where we, the audience, sit.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, and we saw this in Jaws as well, you can't build circles very effectively without blocking out the audience. Obviously, this is more true when you get into a theater space because your audience is, stuck physically on a vertical plane.
Mhm.
But the way Kurosawa builds circles from this kind of upward angle looking down or through or moving through these different groups is very interesting to me because like
Mhm.
oftentimes, and we've talked about this a little bit in like how they had to record audio and stuff like that with different microphone setups, when they were not quite as complex as we have nowadays, um of just even just the logistics of doing that is very interesting, and why this was such a intentional choice to build
Mhm.
circles, to build those stories. um but it also shows us who is outside those circles, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And who is excluded from those circles versus who is kept inside them.
Yeah. There are definitely like those scenes. There are moments where some of the villagers will have an outburst. Like they're all kind of like hunkered down in sorrow at their plight, their situation, And I think Rikichi in particular will have like these moments of like intense emotional outburst, and then he physically moves out of the group. He's part of the group, but in these moments he kind of like others himself insofar as he's like, no, 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 I cannot be part of this right now. Like his emotion is so strong. I really love that. And we also have when they are recruiting the samurai, they're all kind of like, as the team is slowly being put together, they wind up crashing in a barn, a flop house, like just like the most rundown sort of place ever. There are some, I think, some drunks or gamblers nearby as well who are sharing space with them and kind of act as like a Greek chorus, just teasing these guys. They're kind of like they actually have now that I think about it, they're like Statler and Waldorf almost, like this
Yes.
trio of. There are three of them instead of two, but they're just like kind of dunking on the masterless samurai that come through this space quite frequently. It's kind of funny, but in that space, there's a scene where we are introduced to Kikuchiyo, who's played by Toshiro Mifune, iconic actor of Japanese cinema, noted for his frequent collaborations with Akira Kurosawa. And in this, he's playing very much against type and almost like comic comedic character, who is very brash and very loud, but is also like boorish. And I think his like second major scene is him showing up drunk and insisting that he be allowed to join the team. And there's literally a shot where after he chases them around in this barn, there's a shot where the six samurai are in one side of the space, and there's literally like a fence between Kikuchiyo and this group, and he's like reaching through trying to join them. Such a stark like visual reminder of like community and trying that sense of like I want to belong, but I am apart. I cannot.
Yeah, I think kind of along that same line, as we kind of arrive in the village with the samurai, we start off with either the samurai in the middle as like the expert
Mm-hmm.
or experts, and then we have the villagers either around them or they are divided in two halves of a semicircle of
Yeah.
a situation. And as the movie goes on, they begin to merge and mingle. And we go from these two very stark, very clear, separate groups to samurai like holding children and
Mm-hmm.
like playing with kids and being mischievous and like all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And that visual like storytelling of togetherness is just so impactful
Mm-hmm.
throughout the film.
Mm-hmm. Such attention is placed on that kind of disparity in terms of how the villagers treat the samurai. Like they are very deferential. They are afraid of them, and the samurai are this other community within the larger community in so many regards. And gradually, you get that blending. You get that acceptance, that trust that builds between both until you see those things that you were just pointing out. But it's also worth noting that in the battle scenes, it's all just chaos. Like, yes, they are all operating together, they're all working together, but there's less kind of visual importance placed on the samurai in those moments. It is more like the entire community is working together to repel the invaders. You do get those hero moments for the samurai, but in those like kind of wide battle shots, there's like, kind of like a leveling and an equalization of everyone involved.
You mentioned the hero moments for the samurai, and I think we can all kind of picture that moment where the samurai stands off against a big enemy or whatever. But we also have a moment where the samurai are being deferential to the old woman
Mm-hmm.
who had lost her family to these bandits, and then later on where the whole town is like trying to beat up this one dude, this
Mm-hmm.
one bandit who has said like, yes, I confess, I did this and this and this, and the samurai are all trying to stop the townspeople from enacting violence on this man.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody stops talking as the old woman comes through with some kind of gardening implement,
Yeah.
and they're all like, yeah, we'll let her have hers, go on, ma'am.
Yeah.
And the story of like There's a lot of social commentary on not just community, but like power within a community
Yeah.
here. And obviously, our samurai being like this upper class of warrior, but then the deference to age
Yeah.
and wisdom
Hmm.
and right to revenge and stuff like that
Hmm.
is very clear, particularly in this moment, and kind of made me think of that scene in Jaws where the widow shows up. She's not the widow. Every time I think widow,
Yeah.
the mother of the boy who was killed shows
Yeah.
up and everybody stops talking and slaps the cop.
Well, to be clear, not everybody slaps the cop. She slaps
No.
the cop. That would be a very different scene.
that would be a very comedic scene compared
Yeah.
to this. No, but she just walks up and slaps him. Whereas here it's this old woman walking in and being like, I'm just gonna destroy this man for.
Hmm.
And the importance placed on this one woman as a figurehead of this community, but also an outsider,
Hmm.
is very interesting to me.
The way that the movie kind of plays with hierarchical structures like that, at least from like how it presents characters and through dialogue and action, is, I think we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, and maybe tangentially related to that, is it's a little refreshing in that, like, I think from my perspective, certainly, when you think of like a samurai movie, there is that idea of like, oh well, they are these noble, honorable warriors. There's a very like rigid kind of class structure in place. In this, yeah, they are deferring somewhat to this old woman. They defer to the elders of the village. But also, we were just talking about how there are the kind of Statler and Waldorf-esque characters who are just dunking on these masterless samurai. These guys have no lord that they serve. They are wandering ronin in search of employment. And that's an interesting kind of like commentary on class as well. Like, yes, they are certainly these elevated figures, but they're down on their luck. And that kind of represents a lot of certainly historically what was going on in this period, the Warring States period, or the Sengoku era of Japanese history, where just the entire country's in turmoil. So you have a lot of wandering samurai who, in some cases, just manage to sell their services to a local lord, and some of them become bandits.
Well, I think that takes us really tidily into our next topic of discussion, which is individuality. And I want to direct our attention first to Kikuchio,
Yeah.
who is this really cool bridge between the samurai and the farmers for a plethora of reasons, I think.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to touch on him as that bridge a few times for sure, because uh, in terms of him as an individual, as Kikuchi as an individual, you think of Seven Samurai, you think of Toshiro Mifune as this character in many regards. In stark contrast to most of the other samurai who do have those kind of more noble qualities on the surface level, Kikuchio is obnoxious. He's a bit of a jackass, he's loud, he's annoying. He's very much an individual, and he wants recognition as an individual through his actions. In fact, there's a scene in the third act where he goes off and storms a bandit camp to kill one of the guys who has a rifle and steal the rifle. Indirectly, this causes the death of another character, which kind of chastens him, and he kind of like realizes, like, yeah, okay, what I did was individual heroic, but it has this consequence, which kind of harkens back to our sense of like, I didn't serve the community, my actions were self-serving in this moment. But yeah, as an individual, he's right, he's up there. He's one of the most individuals in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before we hit record, that because it is a black and white film and because it is a subtitled film,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes as an English speaking person who is used to color movies, and just, being able to, I don't know, understand more of the cultural context, there were moments where it was hard for me to be like, okay, this is why this person is doing this. This is why this is who this person is, and kind of relation to the group.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a few characters that really pop in terms of individuality. He is one of them. I think our leader, Kanbei,
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely one of them. Katsushiro
Hmm.
of course, our adorable, untested samurai with the romance story that we'll talk about a little bit later is
Yeah.
one of them. And am I pronouncing Kuzo? Kuzio?
Kyuzo, I think.
Kuzo, thank you. As our very, like, distinct, like, vision, I think, of a samurai. When I think samurai, that's what I think of, you know?
Yeah.
And the way the actors portrayed this individualism was absolutely phenomenal. Like, from not just the big acting that we get from uh, Toshiro,
Yeah.
but all of them having their own like personal tics and like physicality
Yeah.
made it such a like it made them come alive
Yeah.
in a lot more dynamic way than you often see in movies nowadays when
Yeah.
we rely more on dialogue and color and visualization in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's such a visual element to so many of these performances. And again, we can talk about Kikuchio till the cows come home, because Toshiro Mifune was kind of given free reign to improvise, which I think is a bit of a rarity for a Kurosawa movie. The physicality he has in the role is just unmistakable.
Oh,
You can see like his posture, his kind of demeanor. His makeup is done in such a way that he looks less like Toshiro Mifune and more like this character. He jumps around a lot. He's a comedic character. He's very funny.
such a
Very
physical actor.
yeah
Just everybody feels very like calm compared to him and all I could think was, "Oh, I'm watching Avatar and this is Boomy." That's all
yeah
I could think of the entire time. I'm like, "Oh my gosh."
yeah. And God, and we cannot discount Takashi Shimura plays Kanbei, the leader of this band of samurai. He's the oldest of them. At the start of the movie, he shaves his head to disguise himself as a monk to save a kid who's been taken hostage by a thief, I think it is, a bandit of some sort. Kashi Shimura, in character as Kanbei, gives this, like, he's got this gesture, this tick. He's always, like, rubbing the back of his head, which is, like, when he's in thought or he is kind of. He does it a few times almost as, like, a gesture of humility as well. Like, someone pays him these compliments and he kind of, like, rubs the back of his head like almost sheepishly. But a lot of these characters have these little ticks and these gestures, and were directed to do so. It's like to come up with these things by Kurosawa, so that they would appear more like visually identifiable as these characters. And Kyuzo in particular stands out because he is so like cool, calm, collected, does not react to anything, and is just the most chill professional killer of the bunch.
But he also has like some really sweet moments when people compliment him or are kind and there's this one moment where Katsushiro compliments him and is very
Effusive.
effusive.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And he's just like, I'm just gonna go to sleep and take a rest. And
Yeah.
the kid walks away, but he hugs his sword and just kind of naps with a little smile on his face. And you're just
Yeah.
like, oh, he's actually a cinnamon roll, but
Yeah.
he's just this big tough, like not even
Yeah.
big tough, but like honorable
Yeah.
man.
He's so graceful and noble,
Yes.
and he's very much that
Yes.
embodiment of the kind of like stereotypes and cliches that we might think of a cinematic samurai. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think this is certainly more on me because these characters get less definition through the movie.
Mhm.
I could not tell you who it is. It might be, is it Shichiroji or Heihachi? I think it's Heihachi who's like chopping wood,
Mhm.
and he's got that epic like battle cry every time he swings the
Yes.
axe. That's a great little bit. One of the samurai, they're doing this test where the Katsushiro is told, like, okay, you get a big stick and you stand on the edge of the door, and I'll invite them through the door frame. And if they just walk through, they're not our guy because you're going to
Yeah.
attack them. And I think one of the samurai walks through and successfully disarms Katsushiro, and one of them's just like sees the door frame and just starts laughing. He's like, no way, nice try. But then they're also like, well, you got the skills then. You spotted it from a mile off. You're our guy.
Yep.
So they all get these wonderful little moments, and God, I cannot for the life of me remember who it is who paints the banner. But like that's another wonderful little character moment of like he visually represents who the samurai are. He's the one who uses the circles on the banner to represent our samurai, the triangle to represent Kikuchiyo. Such a nice little motif. But that also kind of like makes me think of we're kind of dancing around it. Kikuchiyo is not actually a samurai. He is a pretender. He has a fake birth certificate and has forgotten or like whether through just normal life or deliberately has forgotten his own birth name. The son of a farmer who dreams of bigger and better things. A lot of his character kind of becomes this double performance then.
Yeah, and this touches on both individuality and community, and then is going to move us into class mobility. Because I'm a sucker for some structure. But him as this inciting factor of and understanding between the samurai and the villagers is very um it's a very lovely show of what a person can be with understanding. So, like, he understands that the villagers have a stockpile somewhere hidden that no one will find. He understands that they've probably found, armor and weapons, but they're keeping it hidden even from the samurai who are here to protect them because they're afraid. And then he comes in and he's like, "Nah, I know all your tricks."
Yeah.
And this is how we can come together. And he's gruff about it. And we see parts of him in the villagers, and then we see him trying to aspire to, and sometimes clumsily, the samurai as well. Like when he tries to mimic Kyozo
Yeah.
in retrieving this rifle, but doing it for the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
sort of thing. And him as a character being that bridge of teasing the kids, of running around and like trying to bolster the people, all of these things, is a really cool embodiment of, like I said, the potential of if we understand each other and are working towards the same goal, we are more powerful together.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Because he is that pretender and he is that bridge, he lets us in on more of the story in so many regards. I also think it's awesome that you called out that he's very jealous of the kind of admiration Katsushiro has for Kyozo, as that like samurai ideal. There's such an irony to that because originally there were not 7 samurai in the production of this movie. There were 6 samurai. Toshiro Mifune was going to play Kyozo. So there's like this element of like there's a bit of a meta joke there that like yeah he was gonna play the cool calm collected ultimate warrior, and now he's playing this brash wild man character.
And I'm so glad he did.
Yeah.
He crushed it.
It's just so good, but like it's the reason that Kikuchiyo exists as a character is because they realized they needed that connective tissue. They needed to have someone to bring the two groups together a bit more cohesively. So as you're saying, he's the one who knows like right off, like he knows full well the plight of the villagers beyond just like the immediate threat. He knows that they're going to resort to whatever means they have to survive, and that means in some cases killing the quote unquote bandits who've attacked them, who are just samurai who've turned to crime. That it's a matter of perspective, and I think he's really aware of the world that he is in and the realities that everyone's facing.
Yeah, and that really speaks to what class means in this film, because we have different examples of different class members. Like, we have our Katsushiro, who is a wealthy young man who's never really been in the field, who's never really seen poverty until he is brought out with this group and falls in love with a peasant girl, right? And we have Kikuchiyo, who, like you said, is this bridge, and then the rest of them who are poor, but they are samurai, which makes them this elevated kind of class of people. And the lament of the young woman, of Shino,
Yeah.
who wants to be with Katsushiro is just so like seeing those blockades ahead of them, being removed from the culture myself, obviously,
Hmm.
but understanding in a European context what that lack of mobility is, but his innocence of being like, but we could make it work maybe,
Yeah.
is just like, I don't know, there's something very innocent about that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, understanding that there's a lot of power imbalance here, understanding that there might be a world in which he and her are both under the same lord, but he's still elevated above her, and also she's a woman
Hmm.
in, 1500s Japan, and how much power does she really have at all? And just a very interesting dialogue around where people fit in
Yeah.
society and how rigidly they have to keep those places or not in the case of Kikuchio.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the particularly with Katsushiro, like there is a naivete to his character where he has the best of intentions with all of this, I think, but he is not aware of the reality of the situation. He's not aware that this just isn't a viable future. At least, certainly not from her perspective. Like she has no understanding of the class that she would find herself in, as much as as Shino dreams of it. So he's very like he's simultaneously worldly but incredibly unaware, which is a really interesting dichotomy for the character. And by contrast, you have Kikuchio, who is, not the sharpest. He's well, that's not fair. He's not educated, but he's
Yes.
very clever and he's very aware, very perceptive. They act as foils to one another in a fun way. Um,
Yeah.
Interestingly, too, there's that moment at the beginning. Kanbei's leaving the town where Katsushiro and Kikuchio meet him, and Katsushiro's like, "I'm going to pledge myself to service, and this guy's going to be my master, my mentor. I'm going to be a student," and that's what happens. But he's about to go run up and do that, and Kikuchio just like starts bounding past him with the exact same plan, but a completely different tactic for it. And he's kind of Kikuchio is doing like he's got the I'm jumping back to like performance and individuality here, but he's got the body language of like a boxer almost who's like sizing up an opponent when he's like, yeah, I guess you could be my master. I guess he doesn't say
I
it,
guess
but
you're good enough.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
like this implication that he's also going to ask this thing. So Katsushiro's response to this is to just book it and insert himself between the two characters and immediately bow before Kanbei and insist on becoming his student. Kanbei does his little sheepish scratch the back of his head gesture. The rest is history. But I also just want
Well,
to. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think that also speaks a lot to the class conversation, right? Because
Yeah,
Katsushiro has been trained in what society,
yeah.
and by society I mean like upper class society, capital with a capital S,
Hmm.
expects as a samurai. You bow in deference, you do this, you do
Yeah,
that. This is how you talk to a superior. Whereas Kikuchio, not at all. He is a farmer's kid through and through. He is an orphan. He has none of that polish, but all of the heart. And we see that so beautifully in how they approach Kanbei in this moment.
and it's interesting too because Kanbei as well is a bit of commentary on those structures. Kanbei is his introductory scene. He is being like briefed on like, hey, this poor woman, her kid has been taken hostage by this criminal, and this criminal is threatening to kill him. And Kanbei has this understanding of like I can't approach as a samurai. Like I've got the top knot, I've got the clothes, I've got the weapon. I cannot approach this situation, but I have to help. So Kanbei just immediately agrees, like, well, like let me take the food in disguise as a monk. And they're like, well, do you have to shave your head for that? He's like, yeah, do it. There's some reverence for this moment, I think, in how it's shot, because I think you and I don't necessarily have the cultural background for the importance
Yes,
of
absolutely.
samurai culture and of Japanese culture of that era. But this is a big deal for the people around him, certainly. And Kanbei approaches it very matter of factly. He's not above, I don't know if debasing himself is the right word, but he's not above lowering himself in service of the greater good of helping others. And I think it's this moment that sells Katsushiro on, like, this is the guy. This is my hero now. And, indirectly, Kikuchi is also watching this. But I think there's, like, a much more calculating effort on his part. And so, of course, Kanbei approached. He's got the rice balls, or as the Western dubs of Pokemon cartoons would have us believe, jelly donuts. That he approaches the criminal with, and he's like, "I just have food for you and the kid. I'll just toss them in here." He tosses them in there, and there's like a split second where he's like, "Okay, cool," and then he books it in there, and you hear a struggle. The kid stops crying, I think, for this moment, because the kid's been crying throughout all of this. Just silence and tension, and then the criminal stumbles out, wounded, and it's all shot in slow motion too, which is really cool. This is a movie in 1954 with a slow-mo action scene as this criminal in his death throes falls to the ground, and the kid is saved, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, you did it, wonderful." Great little character setting moment for Kanbei, which is of course punctuated by the first person to go up and check to see if the criminal is dead is Kikuchio, who kicks him in the ribs. The guy doesn't react. Kikuchio immediately starts posing with one foot on top of the dead man, basking in secondhand glory. It's remarkable how much of this comes back to Kikuchio for me. I'm like, okay, but did we talk enough about it? Yeah, did we talk enough about this guy?
Well, as much as I also love Kikuchio and he's great, I think one thing that we should point out too is that Katsushiro is very much the audience in a lot of ways during this film. You pointed out to me while we were kind of prepping for this that the camera follows his gaze quite a bit.
Yeah.
But also he is this naive, innocent young man who is coming from a very wealthy, very sheltered place, and this would have hit very differently back in the 1950s.
Yeah.
Particularly, obviously, in Japan, because they had all the cultural context and all these things. But as a Westerner in the 2020s, even then, without that cultural context, his view of the world, his ignorance, brings me deeper into that understanding because we have some explanations of what's going on because he doesn't understand as this, fish out of water, if you will. And I, too, am a fish out of water in this film a little bit. But this movie is so good at that show, not tell of, hey, this is an innocent upper-class kid who's never seen the big city, who's never seen the small town, blah, blah, blah. And our first experience with that, and his first experience with that, is in many ways, I don't want to say shocking, but revolutionary. You know what I mean? Like he's coming to all of these realizations, being like,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is what the world actually is."
Yeah.
Oh, like I'm looking up to all these samurai, all these heroes, but also they're people and
Yeah,
imperfect, but also cool and like.
It's very revelatory for him in many regards. He learns a lot of life lessons.
Yeah.
Has a lot of life experiences too.
Oh, he sure does. He becomes a man.
Yeah, he becomes a man in multiple ways. Let me rephrase. In multiple interpretations.
Yes.
Yeah, he's got quite the arc in this because he's very naive, very learning a lot about the world. He has his first romance, hooks up with his love interest the night before the big battle.
Yeah. Should we talk about that briefly?
Probably.
Because I had a lot of feelings about that scene
we should absolutely talk about that.
Power.
Yeah.
Because at the beginning of the movie, the townspeople are super excited that the samurai are coming.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh yeah, they're going to save us. And then Shino's father is like, well, we know what happens when samurai come.
Mm-hmm.
They rape our women.
Mm-hmm.
That's a foregone conclusion. That's not even like a concern. And so he gets his daughter to cut her hair to look like a boy. And so we have the first moment of Kichiro seeing seeing Shino and being like, "Hey, man, you should be fighting because
Mhm.
we have a Mulan moment," is what I'm
Yeah.
saying. And so he chases her down and then accidentally grabs the boob. And he's like, "Oh shit, I'm so sorry. Oh geez, I'm so sorry,
Yeah.
ma'am. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't." But it kicks off a very innocent, like, "Here, I brought you some rice." He brings her his food. He doesn't even, like, he goes hungry so she can eat. And then she says later on, like, "I wish I had been born into a samurai family so we could be together." And then says something that made me stop. She says, basically, like, "Be a samurai, rape me." And I don't know if that's a lost in translation thing or what is going on, but it was like, I understand conceptually that she is of a lower class. She knows that that's what's going to happen. But she's also a young woman who has been raised in a society where premarital sex is not okay. She wants it, but she doesn't have the language to want it. And I was just like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do with
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. It's there's some. Yeah, it's. I think your kind of touch point that you were talking about before we hit record was, "Baby, It's Cold Outside," which
Yes,
there's
yes.
obviously there's been a lot of commentary on that song the last decade plus over uh, how the lyrical content has been perceived and interpreted, but there's also that element of it's very much that like the trope of like, well, aren't you going to ravish me?
Yes.
That's kind of the trope at play. But I think the twist on it here, oh, I'm smacking things on my desk here. I think the twist on the trope here is like there is an element of, I guess, resignation or acceptance of like, I've been told that this is what samurai do, so just get it over with.
Yep.
But it does become a much more it's almost an acknowledgement of that power imbalance, the power structure at play.
Yeah, yeah. And then the thing too is, and this is going past, well, it's an examination of a different kind of class because
Hmm.
later on, the two of them are caught. Her father Shino's father catches them after they've rolled in the hay,
Hmm.
as it were. And he beats her
Hmm.
fully, just like in the street, throws her in the mud, slaps her, kicks her, leaves her crying in the mud. And she's a slut, she's a whore. He uses these words to describe her. And then almost immediately in the next scene, all of the men are joking around together and they're like, "Oh, Katsushiro's a man now. You're a real samurai because you're a man and you had sex with a woman." And it's just like, if we're talking about class, both him as a samurai and him as a man
Yeah.
gives him this heightened power to be able to do these things
Hmm.
without the consequences.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating kind of sublayer that isn't a main focus
Yeah.
of the film, but the fact that they included all of the different viewpoints of that moment was very interesting to me.
He is free from the consequences of his
Yes.
actions functionally. I don't know that the film is deliberately trying to play up that theme, but it's certainly not shying away from it. The gender and sexual politics of 1954 Japan, wildly different from our current context, but it is interesting that there is still a focus paid to this.
Very
And
much so.
simultaneously, the relationship, barring these sorts of scenes, is portrayed very positively and consensually. Like they're very, like it is very much like a young love, or at the very least, young lust. There's attraction and respect for one another. It's a rough scene.
Yeah.
That bit. And not the only rough scene involving a relationship, I think, because we're not touching on it directly yet, but one of the lead villager characters, Rikichi, he's in agony throughout most of this movie as he is like no one can really figure out what's going on with him. He is upset. He's angry. I think there's even a scene where one of the samurai or fellow villagers like what? Don't you have a wife? Like one of the samurai specifically is like, well, don't you have a wife? And he like gets just loses his mind. Later on, we realize he helps with a raid on a house way on the outskirts somewhere. They light these houses on fire, um, and I think it's his wife runs out, and the moment of revelation is that she has been taken, kidnapped by these bandits, and kept as functionally a sex slave. She runs out of this house, sees Rikichi, and immediately runs back into the burning house, which is just brutal. I have no other thoughts on that. It's rough
Yeah.
as hell.
Yeah, and the fact that this scene comes before the beating of Shiro is so indicative of the response that this woman probably expected from her husband of I'm no longer clean, I'm no longer all of these things because I have been abused and the only way to rectify this is to kill myself so he does not have to live with my shame.
Yeah.
And it is heartbreaking that in that moment we see the result of the culture this young woman has grown up with and it informs us the viewer how we are supposed to feel seeing this young woman fall in love, have sex outside of marriage with a man who is A, not her husband, but B, a different class than her,
Mm-hmm.
and then being caught, the result of that, and what we might imagine her life will be like now that she is quote unquote damaged goods
Mm-hmm.
is truly like it's a gut punch in a movie that is overall like pretty upbeat and lovely and like yeah, there's big fight scenes and there's death, but it's all very like it's a movie like you said at the beginning, it's a movie with a lot of heart, but
Mm-hmm.
this one, this through line of gender and class and sexuality and relationships,
Mm-hmm.
it's a gut punch. And then it's over. And we as we close, Katsushiro is still following this girl around like a lost puppy.
Yeah.
And so we're left with hope question mark because he wants her still to be maybe his lover or girlfriend or wife to rise her
Mm-hmm.
in that class structure, but of course we have to wonder is that possible?
Mm-hmm.
And what is her life going to be now that she is, ruined, quote unquote.
Well, yeah.
Um
I think it's
yeah.
also though like she is. There's this scenes where she faces. I hate saying the word consequences. There are
Mhm.
scenes where she faces some sort of response for her actions. It is, I mean, we know it's unwarranted, but in her closing scenes where she kind of bypasses Katsushiro and moves on to join the other women in this like the work song that they are all involved in, she kind of rejects this potential, opportunity is not the right word, but this potential relationship, whatever it could become. There's an acknowledgement of like her place in her community, and maybe I think cynically from my perspective, maybe that there's certainly a traditionalist leaning throughout this movie. The community, the individual's role within the community, but also these specific roles that people fall into within society and within the kind of the gender structures. I think also, that being said, she almost has more agency within her community at the end than she would if she were to try and rise above that station.
What's funny you read it that way because I read it as a young woman who has been taught that this is what happens when samurai come to town. Young women get ravaged and then the samurai leave. And she doesn't want to get her hopes up. That's how I read it. That she doesn't think that this young man is actually going to fulfill the promise of, well, what if? Because that's a very Cinderella story,
Yeah,
and that's not this story.
yeah.
Or at least that's kind of the impression I got.
That also kind of makes me think of a theme that we're probably not touching on so much, at least directly so far, is the idea of like the idealized sort of notion of what a samurai is versus the reality, and
Hmm.
the kind of like juxtaposition of idealism versus pragmatism and reality that is present throughout this. We kind of explore that a bit through both Kikuchio and Katsushiro. They both have idealized ideas of what a samurai is. They both think that they should be like heroic warriors. How that plays out, very different from what they have in their heads. Where am I going with this?
Well, I think I think the where we could go with this is to start to close on this as a samurai movie, this as a Akira Kurosawa movie,
Hmm.
and where this fits in kind of the broader um, filmography, if
Hmm.
you will.
I think if we're talking about the broader sense of where this movie fits in with samurai film, with Japanese film, with Akira Kurosawa, I can offer a little bit of context around this almost being, in so many ways, like as masterful an example as it is of Kurosawa's filmmaking skills, even so early on in his career. There are ideas in here that he comes back to, that he continues to visit and to play with. If this is kind of like your kickoff to all things Akira Kurosawa, you're in for just a world of fun and wonder and joy, and also a lot of heartbreak, depending on what movies you watch of his. But if you want to stick on the kind of like samurai angle of things, my interpretation is that it exists somewhat as a response to a lot of other samurai fiction. If we look at kind of historical context for when this movie is set, it is set in an era of strife and conflict immediately preceding what is widely thought of as a bit of a Renaissance age for Japanese society, particularly arts and culture, a relative period of stability and peace that followed. And it's in that period of peace that these samurai, instead of just being warriors, become elevated to aristocracy. They are able to invest more of their time in being artists themselves and patrons of the arts. So I think that this period starts becoming an era in which a lot of the kind of tropes around the honorable samurai, the noble samurai, the protector of the innocent start to really take off. This movie coming, centuries after that, is a bit of a response and a rebuttal of a lot of those tropes and ideas. So it's interesting to me that this movie starts deconstructing some of those stereotypes and inadvertently building them back up, or building new ones in its place, building new cliches and tropes in its place. So I think that's really fascinating. There are critics who will call this movie. When I say critics, I mean people who are just conducting a close reading of this movie. I don't mean people who are bashing it, who interpret it as almost like a western, and we kind of see that in some of the subsequent movies that Kurosawa directs, some of the subsequent samurai movies that he directs, particularly Yojimbo and Sanjuro. Yojimbo is really interesting. I hope that we get to do an episode on it in the future, because that movie has been remade probably like a cartoonishly greater number of times than Seven Samurai. Like Seven Samurai is like there. I mentioned up top, like A Bug's Life, the Pixar movie. That is Seven Samurai. Zack Snyder just did 2 movies on Netflix that are what if we did Seven Samurai but in space. I did not care for those movies. If you enjoy them, more power to you. The trope of like we got to put a team together is kind of codified by Seven Samurai, and it spreads out, and its influence is seen in so many other things. Yojimbo, in particular, which stars Toshiro Mifune as a much more cool, calm, collected samurai than he plays here, is itself a loose adaptation of, I want to say, a Dashiell Hammett novel. It
Huh.
gets remade as A Fistful of Dollars, which is a Sergio Leone spaghetti western with Clint Eastwood. I think there was like a lawsuit involved because Kurosawa was like, I've seen the film and it's a very fine film, but it's my film, and it's undeniable like that they are drawing from the same well. There's a much later in the '90s, Bruce Willis did an action movie I think called Last Man Standing. I want to say is the title of it. There is like a little preface, or the little titles at the start of the movie that say this movie is based on Yojimbo by, oh no, it's this movie is based on A Fistful of Dollars dot dot dot, which is based on Yojimbo dot dot dot, which is based on, like it really draws attention to it, which is really wonderful. I've been rambling for a little bit about how this fits into samurai pictures. I feel like I'm circling my closing thoughts. I think if you wanted to continue on with samurai movies, this is a great starting point. This is a great starting point for Kurosawa movies in general. And if you want more awesome Kurosawa samurai movies, go watch Yojimbo. That's just a fun action movie. Watch its sequel, Sanjuro, which is a bit more of an action comedy. If you want just more awesome Kurosawa movies in general, I love High and Low. That is a Kurosawa noir film, and it's
Ooh.
real good. If you liked this movie, go watch those things next.
If you're looking for a movie you don't have to pay attention to, I will say this is not it. Not because it's complicated, because it is a very simple plot. Like you've pointed out, it has been redone over and over and over again because it is so relatable and so like human.
Mhm.
Um, but it will absolutely pull you in and make you pay attention.
Mhm.
It's a simple but rich story. The cast is incredible. And for those of you who are like me, who look at it and you're like, I don't want to do 3 hours of subtitles, that sounds awful. The dialogue isn't actually that complex. And I mean that in the best way. It's rich and evocative, and it really exemplifies show, not tell, in a way that draws you in and really makes you relate to these characters in a way that is, like I said, very human and kind of transcends the fact that this is a 70-year-old movie that is based on, 500 and change years in the past. And, like, I've never been super, like, into, the genre so much, but this didn't feel like a samurai movie, even though
Mhm.
it is the quintessential samurai movie. It just felt like a story of people saving their village, period. Full stop, with a lot of
Yeah.
really wonderful characters along the way, and I love that. So if you're looking for a movie that you kind of actually have to actively watch because A, subtitles, and B, you're going to want to, this is the one.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that quote, the director of Parasite from a few years back, Bong Joon-ho, said something. Once you overcome the 1 inch tall barrier of subtitles, you'll be
Yes.
introduced to so many more amazing films.
Absolutely. Yes, accurate. And my last thing too is, as I was watching, it really made me want to dig deeper and overcome that 1 inch
Hmm.
barrier, right? Not just the subtitles, but the understanding of culture and history and all of these different pieces that, sometimes I just want to watch a movie and turn my brain off. And that's totally valid. And then sometimes you watch a movie that makes you think. And that's also totally valid. And then sometimes you get something like this, where it doesn't quite make you think. It's not quite, something to turn your brain off to, but it's something that speaks to you as a person in a society, in a community. And that feels really good.
Hmm. Yeah, it's I think we've been kind of circling around this idea of like close reading and criticism of
Mhm.
of movies, and I think like the thing that we'd want anyone listening to this to take away is that you can, no matter how you engage with a movie, whether it is just like I just want to watch a fun popcorn flick, I just want to have something on in the background, or I want to dig in deeper. Thinking about how you engage with it is like that's criticism. That is what film criticism and analysis is, and it's as fun as you want it to be, as deep as you want it to be.
Yeah, and I think there's an opportunity in that to bring down the high courts of movie criticism with a capital C and just engage on a one-to-one level between yourself and a creator, and that's no less relevant than the big, like,
Yeah, yeah,
the big professional critiquers who are deciding the Oscars or Best Picture and all these things. Your critique is just as valid, and that's fun. That's
yeah.
half the fun of the movie sometimes. So
I mean, like if you know, to anyone listening who's out there like thinking that the Academy Award Committee is necessarily uh, the creme de la creme of film criticism, they're not.
so all that said, I don't think we've picked a next movie. And because this is the last of our testers, I don't think we have to say it. But insert movie here. It's
Insert.
very exciting. Where can people find you, Ben?
People can find me at caffeinated cartography. No, at cafe cartography, which is short for caffeinated cartography. I just like to post nerdy things like models I've painted and artwork that I've worked on, and yeah, you can find me there. We've got a Facebook page for this podcast, Coffee and Kurosawa. It is still a work in progress. Hopefully, by the time you listen to this podcast, it'll be the progress will have progressed, but we'll see. Farrah, where can folks find you?
Folks can find me at Farrah Sarpkaya on Instagram and a couple of other sites. You can also find me at sarpkaya.ca, where I lend my voice as a voice actor. So if you like what you hear, get in touch. And that's all for us, I do believe. We will be back at you next time with a movie that we'll figure out at a later date. Thanks for listening.